Chapter 35. The Flesh is Weak. All systems prepare to power down. Main drives offline. Engineering offline. Navigation offline. Auxiliary power disabled. All systems black. The Marathon is standing down. You are go to remove the antimatter reactor. Copy all, Marathon. Extraction underway. Understood. This is the Coalition Warship Marathon. Signing off. Rising from a cavernous hole carved into the side of the hull, Marathon's antimatter power plant was carefully removed in an hour-long operation. Ino watched the proceedings from the Tennesilsi, which hovered about 500 feet above the wreck of her old starship. The battered Caravaneer vessel was part of a much larger flotilla, which was in the final stages of evacuating the Marathon crash site. Despite being hundreds of feet above the scene, Ino was able to listen into the communications of the workers down below. This was because of a recent development. "How are your first implants performing?" Rylan asked as he approached. Ino absent-mindedly raised her left hand to touch a spot on her skull, just above her left ear. A thin scar ran along the length of Ino's forearm, evidence of recent surgical repair. The most visible sign of change was Ino's hair. A small portion of her skull was shaved, revealing a new scar. Ino's injuries had been expertly repaired by Savanti doctors, and with her permission, they also installed her first cybernetic implants, a series of synthetic devices that allowed Ino to connect herself to the fusion interlink. She could now interface with the cyborg technology implanted in Savanti people, and they could interface with her in kind. "It takes some getting used to," Ino replied, looking out the window. "Why didn't you tell me that your people have a way to digitally ask for consent before talking to each other?" Rylan shrugged. "Humans do not always ask for consent to communicate when speaking to one another. We use our consent filters as an anti-spam measure, since the Fusion Interlink enables virtual communication with limitless partners regardless of proximity." "Okay, fair enough," Ino said. "How long do I need to be off my feet? I feel recovered already, and I want to go down there and help everyone work." "Fusing flesh and machine is a precise art that takes time," Rylan explained. "You must rest and allow your body time to adapt to the new implants. You can trust us to implement your plan in your absence." Ino sighed and reluctantly went back to gazing out of the window. She hated being idle like this. All of the work below was part of a plan she authored. But Rylan was right. Ino needed to rest, not only to recover from her wounds and injuries, but to conserve her strength for the final part of this crisis. Sota was the first member of the Marathon crew to arrive at the Savanti colony. Simply referred to as the Source, this city was all that remained of a colony ship, dismantled and rebuilt into housing for untold thousands of people. The Source had doubled in size as Caravaneers, escaped slaves, and Savanti refugees from elsewhere arrived to seek shelter. When he stepped off the boarding ramp of the Savanti corvette, the first thing Sota saw was the project taking up the city center. A great pillar rose up from the ground, topped by a pair of construction cranes. A local engineer ran onto the landing pad and greeted Sota. "Assembly is moving at a brisk pace," the man reported. "Do you have word on the antimatter generator?" "It's on the way," Sota replied. "I've brought technicians who have expertise with these systems. Chief Engineer Kazuki will be their commander. Direct all questions to him." A team of Coalition engineers debarked and formed up behind Sota. As Kazuki took charge of the ship, Sota sidestepped the Savanti engineer and made his way toward an android sitting on the far side of the landing pad. "You're a delegate, right?" Sota asked. "Captain Esperanta wants an update on Astro Creator Azaren." "I do not have good news," Delegate replied. You should follow me. Delegate led Sota across the landing pad and through a gate that led into a Savanti military base. Two of the Allied soldiers waved them through and pointed in the direction of the field hospital. Sota followed Delegate inside, where the two were guided the rest of the way into one of the recovery wards. Here they found both Elodie and Astro Creator Azarin. The plantoid alien looked even more sickly than the first time Sota had seen her. Azarin's leaves were now multicolored, red, yellow, and brown. The vines and boughs which made up her body made creaking sounds when she turned to face them, and the one remaining nuclei on her back seemed to have more light than the rest of her body. Sota looked alarmed, causing Azarin to give him a weak smile. You fret over nothing, young man, Azarin creaked. Did the Desticans do this to you? Sota asked. Were you tortured during captivity? Azarin laughed, her voice weak. Tortured? No, certainly not. But the Desticans are responsible for my present condition, yes. Sota mentally retraced his steps. He tried to remember everything about the battle, about how Azarin was freed from the Kailasha and returned to safety. She had not been with Ino at the time. Instead, Azarin was found in the brig, already looking sickly. But there was no sign of violence on Azarin's body. Sota tried to think hard to figure out what happened to her. But then, Delegate seemed to find the answer. Astro Creator, you are missing a nuclei, Delegate said. Sota did a double take. Elodie sat up in her bed, trying to get a better look. Now that Delegate pointed this out, Sota remembered something. When Azarin first came aboard the Marathon, she had 3 large nuclei growing out of her shoulders, level with her head. Now, only 1 remained. Didn't you say those grow back? Sota asked cautiously. They do when we are young, Azarin replied. I applaud you for paying attention to my story, but the nuclei grow in abundance and must be pruned during the fruitful and fertile years. I am old and nearing the end of my natural life. So to answer your question, no, they do not grow back. Sota felt his blood run cold. He had a very strong hunch as to what happened to the other 2 nuclei, but he needed to ask all the same. What happened to the other 2? I used one to seed this world, Azarin explained. The nuclei exist at the core of my astro creation methods. Without them, the wellspring of life forming around us would not exist. And the second? A Destican cut it off while I was held aboard their ship with your captain, Azarin said. I have not seen it since. Without waiting for any further explanation, Sota stormed out of the room. He needed to make a call. Behind him, Delegate began to plead. Astro Creator, by your own words, you can only create 1 more Gaia world with your nuclei. Should it not be a true homeworld for synthetic life? Ino and Rylan were still watching the proceedings at Marathon's crash site when a frantic message from Sota came through for them. I need to get in touch with Prisbin and Rylan, Sota spoke over the radio. Does the Destican Astral Fellowship know anything about Azarin and her astral creation system? Rylan's here with me, Ino replied. Stand by, I'll ask. Rylan furrowed his brow while Ino spoke to him. Azarin's research into astral creation was a closely guarded secret, Rylan said. That's why my mission to protect and escort her was so important. Is there any way word could have leaked? A possibility, Ino said. She asked because she could already think of one. It was causing a small amount of distress in the back of her mind as an artificially repressed memory battled against her subconscious mind. Telepathic infiltration, Rylan said. No, my ship was secure. But mine wasn't, Ino breathed. We had an enemy telepath on board. Sota locked him in a vault just before the ship crashed. Hermione Durant, along with several of the UN Space Marines, was escorting the captured Destican fighters to a hastily assembled prison camp on the outskirts of the Source when her communicator chirped. Durant, this is Agdashlu, said the voice of her teammate Reza. I have an interrogative from Captain Esperanta and Commander Beninato. What happened to the enemy shaman who was captured just before Marathon crashed? Hermione racked her brain for a moment, then responded that no one had seen the enemy shaman since his capture. He was alive, sure, she said, but he was in a bad way. I don't think he survived the crash. I have reason to believe the enemy shaman survived the crash, Axiom told Ino. The captain swore. Vault, Ino seethed. Beninato threw his ass in a weapons vault. Yes, the android said. I have dispatched android search parties to comb the wreckage. We have found evidence that suggests a sentient party, or parties unknown, are living undetected inside the wreck. An unidentified actor has tapped into the reassembled comms tower and is using it to listen to our activities. No illicit transmissions have been sent, but I remain confident that we have an eavesdropper. Ino looked out the window, down at the smashed wreckage of her vessel below. Axiom, Ino asked, are you clear of the ship? Your AI core, I mean. Yes, Captain, I am clear, Axiom replied. My hardware is safely housed at the Source now. Ino nodded. Call Sota back. Conference him in with us right now. Rylan watched Ino with a concerned expression on his face. Moments later, Sota's voice came over the intercom. What's the call, Captain? Sota asked. How many of our people are left on Marathon? Ino asked. The last of us left this morning, Sota said. Chief of the Watch Hamilton did a head count, and we've accounted for all but 10 members of the crew. Those are the folks who went missing in action during the crash? Ino asked. Affirmative, that's correct. Stand by for just a moment, Ino said. She watched as, down below, the Savanti corvette started to move away from Marathon. The antimatter reactor hung beneath the starship precariously. Rylan, would you apologize to your people on my behalf for the unplanned pyrotechnics? Ino said in a cold voice. Unplanned pyro... Oh... Rylan gasped. Ino turned away from the Marathon shipwreck and looked at Axiom. If that shaman really is still crawling around my ship and doing God knows what kind of telepathic bullshit down there, well, I can do something about that, Ino seethed. Axiom, I order you to scuttle the Marathon. Axiom tilted his head. Authenticate, commanding officer. I authenticate Scabba Flow. Ino spoke the code word with barely concealed rage. Axiom nodded. Authenticate, first officer. I authenticate Midway Island, Sota's voice said over the radio. Axiom nodded again. Authentication codes verified. I am now establishing contact with the scuttle charges. Over the radio, Sota sighed. Oh, she sure was a good ship. Ino peered out of the window, looking down at the wreckage for the final time. Farewell, Marathon, and we thank you. Inside the shipwreck, Shaman Paranold was already moving. He, along with 6 Destican soldiers and 3 human prisoners, were scrambling through twisted hulks of metal, racing toward a known exit point. Paranold was the slowest in the group, hobbled by the extensive telepathic injuries received earlier in the battle. He had attempted to penetrate the mind of a synthetic life form. He knew that now upon reflection. It would take months, if not years, to fully recover his abilities. And suddenly, he had no time at all. The prisoners and soldiers knew little to nothing of the situation. Paranold rarely told them anything, and he snapped if they questioned his orders or hesitated to obey. But when the order came to run, they saw the urgency in his eyes and began to move. The shaman and his entourage were deep inside the marathon, and after a few minutes of frantic running and climbing, Paranold realized he was not going to escape. He reached into the folds of his robes and produced a large, heavy object wrapped in a cloth. "Take it!" he growled to one of the Destican soldiers. "But I fought so hard to bring this from Kailasha," one of the soldiers protested. "Take it now!" Paranold insisted. "Keep it secret! Keep it safe! Give it only to a son of the Nivella! May he live forever! Now take it and go! Leave me!" Deep within the ship, scuttle charges began to detonate. Explosions rumbled like earthquakes, and the marathon started to collapse on itself. The great noise of crashing metal thundered up to the sky, echoed off Tennesilsi's hull, and rumbled across the landscape like a harbinger of doom. Fire spewed up from the wreck, followed by acrid black smoke. With a great heave, Marathon seemed to take one last breath and fell in upon itself. The warship utterly collapsed into a cloud of smoke and dust. Amidst the carnage, two figures slipped out of the debris and vanished into the surrounding wilderness.
As you're on your way back home, something catch your eyes untold. Fear of darkness lingers here. You tremble as you get the fear. Now you're on the cornerstone.